faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Ema Talking Books. Today we're exploring the book, The Unending Quest. The subtitle is The Autobiography of Karl Popper. Karl Popper was one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers. He's the only philosopher ever elected to Britain's Royal Society. His ideas impacted many scientists, politicians, and financial figures. Physicists like Einstein, Bohr, and Schrödinger were all influenced by Popper's philosophy. Stephen Hawking deeply studied Popper's works in university and used them as the philosophical foundation for his physics research. UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher called Popper her mentor, and financial giant George Soros was Popper's student. Soros dedicated his life to promoting Popper's philosophy, with his investment principles rooted in Popper's ideas. So, what kind of person was Popper? Why did his ideas influence multiple fields like science, politics, and economics in the 20th century? And what can we ordinary people learn from Popper's ideas? Today, I'll answer these questions through his autobiography, The Unending Quest. This autobiography was first written in 1986 when Popper was 84. In 1992, at 90, he revised the entire content. With 40 chapters, Popper chronologically reviews his life and the development of his philosophy. Okay, I'll now break it down into 3 parts to explain the book's main content. First part will outline Popper's life. Second part, I'll systematically explain Popper's philosophy of science. Third part, we'll discuss the application of his political philosophy in society. All right, let's start by learning about Popper's life. On July 28, 1902, Karl Popper was born in Vienna, Austria, to a middle-class family. His father was a lawyer, and his mother came from a musical background. With a large home library, he read extensively from childhood, including philosophical works by Plato, Bacon, Descartes, Spinoza, Kant, and others. At age 8, he began pondering the philosophical question of what infinite space is. His uncle explained it by saying, "Keep adding bricks to a space, and it'll never fill up. This space is infinite," and Popper wasn't satisfied because he believed that infinite space doesn't depend on whether you put things in it. Thus, even from a young age, Popper had unique insights into philosophy. Well, in 1914, World War I broke out. At that time, Popper was only 12 years old, too young to enlist. Although Austrian officials kept proclaiming that the war was continuously victorious, Popper personally witnessed the heartbreaking grief of people losing their families and the scenes of many starving to death on the streets due to poverty. This made the young Popper start paying attention to a series of social issues, including war. In 1917, Popper fell seriously ill and had to drop out of high school, also failing to enter university. Later, he became an auditor at the University of Vienna. Popper considered 1919, during his time as an auditor, to be an extremely important year for him. And that year he was 17, and 2 events greatly influenced his thinking. The first event was related to the famous psychologist Adler. Adler studied under Freud and was the founder of individual psychology. Popper attended Adler's lectures and later had the privilege of interning at Adler's psychology clinic. Although Popper greatly respected Adler's character, he strongly disliked his psychological theories. The core concept of Adler's psychology is inferiority. Simply put, he believed that inferiority is the most important factor influencing a person's behavior. Inferiority can cause a series of psychological problems, while also motivating people to strive for a better life out of shame. While this view can indeed explain many psychological issues, Adler tried to use it to explain all psychological problems, which Popper found hard to accept. Popper recalled that once, when he reported a case to Adler, Adler immediately explained it using his inferiority theory, without hesitation. Popper was surprised and asked Adler why he was so confident in his conclusion without even seeing the patient. Adler said it was because he had 1,000 previous experiences This incident made Popper begin to doubt the scientific nature of psychology. The second event that profoundly influenced Popper was related to Einstein. In 1916, Einstein published the general theory of relativity and predicted that light would bend under the influence of gravitational fields. Uh, oh, oh. In 1919, scientists observed a total solar eclipse on the island of Principe in the Atlantic Ocean, which proved Einstein correct. This meant that Newton's classical mechanics, which people had believed to be absolute truth, was overturned. Einstein also gave a lecture on general relativity in Vienna. Popper also attended that lecture. Although he didn't fully grasp the general theory of relativity at the time, it hit him hard, completely overturning his dogmatic views on science and knowledge. It was from 1919 that Popper began pondering, what's the difference between Adler's theories and Einstein's ideas? What is real science and the scientific method? In 1922, Popper officially enrolled at the University of Vienna. To become a teacher after graduation, he chose psychology and got his psychology degree in 1928. After earning his doctorate, he landed a high school teaching job as he'd hoped and married his university classmate, Josephine Henninger. Henninger wasn't just Popper's lifelong soulmate, but also a great helper in his work. The first drafts of many of Popper's works were typed out word by his wife on a typewriter. However, Popper didn't end up becoming a teacher. Instead, he took the path of philosophy. Contact with the Vienna Circle was a key reason for his career shift. The Vienna Circle was a philosophical school that emerged in Vienna in the 1920s, with core figures being philosophers Moritz Schlick and Rudolf Carnap. In the Vienna Circle's view, philosophical research shouldn't be purely speculative metaphysics. It's more valuable to study science as the subject. Thus, the philosophy of science gradually rose. The Vienna Circle believed only two types of propositions are meaningful. First, those verified by experience. Second, those proven by mathematical logic. So their philosophy is also called logical empiricism or logical positivism. Back then, one core issue the Vienna Circle studied was the problem of induction. But everyday induction is often incomplete and can't yield reliable knowledge. In 1934, Popper published the book, The Logic of Scientific Discovery, Cleverly Solving the Induction Problem. I'll go into detail about this book's core content later on. This book catapulted Popper to fame and cemented his place in the philosophical world. After that, he got speaking invites from academic circles across Europe. Between 1935 and 1936, Popper spoke at universities like Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial College, and LSE, meeting big-name scholars like Bertrand Russell and Friedrich Hayek. At this time, Austria was about to be annexed by Nazi Germany, with rising anti-Semitic sentiment across the country. Popper's grandparents were Jewish. Although his parents had renounced Judaism and converted to Christianity early on, Popper couldn't guarantee he'd escape persecution. To help Popper escape the dangerous situation, Cambridge University offered him a short-term position. However, Popper ultimately chose to take his wife to New Zealand's University of Canterbury as a philosophy lecturer, a decision that proved wise. During the 1930s to 40s, World War II engulfed nearly the entire globe. New Zealand, being geographically remote, remained untouched by the war. This proved fortunate both for Popper personally and for 20th century philosophy. During this period, Popper deeply contemplated fascism's global spread, extending his philosophy from science to society, completing his political masterworks, The Poverty of Historicism and The Open Society and Its Enemies. The core content of these two books, I'll mention them later, but their publication faced difficulties. Take The Open Society and Its Enemies, rejected by over 20 British publishers in 1943 due to its critiques of Plato and Aristotle. Just when Popper was deeply discouraged, Hayek selflessly helped him. Hayek was a world-renowned economist and political philosopher who won the 1974 Nobel Prize in Economics. Also Austrian, he shared similar life experiences with Popper. At that time, he taught at the London School of Economics. Hayek recognized the value of Popper's manuscript.
Through Hayek's relentless efforts, The Open Society and Its Enemies was finally published in 1945.
History proved Hayek's discernment right. The book was translated into over 30 languages, continuously reprinted, with its open society concept highly regarded in the West. The book became one of the 20th century's most influential political philosophy classics. With Hayek's help after World War II ended in 1946, Popper secured a lectureship at LSE, ending his displacement from his 1946 return to Europe until his 1994 death. Popper spent most of his later years in London, became a British citizen, and never returned to live in his native Vienna. Several universities in Vienna invited him back to teach, but he refused them all. Even when his mother was seriously ill in Austria and his wife longed to return, they couldn't convince Popper to move back to his homeland. In truth, Popper held deeply ambivalent feelings toward Vienna. On one hand, it held his childhood memories, relatives, and friends. On the other hand, Vienna's deep-rooted hatred toward Jews caused Popper profound pain. Yet, his time in London provided stability and ample research opportunities. He published The Logic of Scientific Discovery and Conjectures and Refutations, summarizing his philosophy of science. At LSE, he mentored many students, forming the Popperian School, with Paul Feyerabend and Imre Lakatos as its most famous members. They later became leading figures in the philosophy of science. Popper had no children throughout his life. Only his wife was his constant companion. And then, in 1986, after his wife's death, Popper began writing. This book reflects on his life. Even in his 80s, he insisted on independent living, managing daily routines himself, embodying the autonomy he championed. In 1994, Popper died of cancer in London at age 90. Scholars consider Popper's greatest achievement his philosophical examination of science. So what theory influenced the entire 20th century, profoundly impacting Einstein and Bohr? Next, we'll explore Popper's philosophy of science. Simply put, Popper solved two key problems in philosophy of science: the problem of induction and the demarcation problem. First, let's discuss the problem of induction. In The Logic of Scientific Discovery, Popper thoroughly examined this issue. Since ancient times, people have highly valued inductive reasoning based on experience. For example, the Chinese observed seasonal patterns over centuries, developing the 24 solar terms to guide agriculture. Modern science relies on inductive reasoning through experiments and observations to gain knowledge. For instance, every time we add iodine to starch, it turns blue. Thus we conclude, starch turns blue with iodine, but is such inductive reasoning reliable? And British philosopher David Hume argued it's fundamentally unreliable. He gave the example of swans. We usually see white ones. When we see thousands of white swans, it's easy to conclude that all swans are white.
But actually, even if we see 100 million white swans, we still can't conclude all swans are white.
Since black swans exist in this world, if inductive reasoning is invalid, do empirical observations and scientific experiments still matter? This problem stumped many philosophers and became the Vienna Circle's biggest challenge in the early 20th century. But Popper offered his solution. The value of inductive reasoning lies in falsification. Falsification means eliminating wrong options. For example, seeing one black swan falsifies the conclusion that all swans are white. It's falsified. In scientific progress, competing theories always emerge simultaneously.
Take early 20th century physics. Newton's absolute spacetime and Einstein's relativity coexisted and competed until experimental observation
Falsified Newton's theory, advancing physics into the Einstein era. Therefore, empirical observation and experimentation remain science's foundation.
The other problem Popper solved is the demarcation problem.
This refers to distinguishing science from pseudoscience. Popper compared Einstein's relativity with Adler's psychology, finding their key difference in falsifiability.
Einstein proposed general relativity while providing verification methods, observing light deflection during solar eclipses.
This makes Einstein's theory falsifiable. Note, falsifiability differs from falsification. Falsifiability means a theory can be empirically tested for truth, while falsification confirms it's false. Einstein's theory was falsifiable, but ultimately not falsified. Now consider Adler's psychology. Though many consider his inferiority theory scientific, Popper saw it as unscientific because it's unfalsifiable, meaning Adler could explain any case with his theory. Since unfalsifiable, it's not science, just a theory. In reality, we find many theories claiming to explain everything, like all-knowing fortune-telling or cure-all witchcraft, that aren't scientific or falsifiable. Even when fortune-telling fails or treatments don't work, they have excuses to prove their theories aren't wrong. The problem lies with the subjects of fortune-telling or healing. We've covered Popper's two key concepts, falsification and falsifiability. As mentioned, the Vienna Circle, logical positivism, emphasized empirical verification. But Popper argued science can't verify anything, only falsify. This crushed logical positivism, leading to its decline post-1950s. So how does science progress under Popper's framework? A late book by Popper reveals the path, conjectures and refutations. First conjecture. When we observe a phenomenon or face a problem, we need a theory to explain or solve it. That theory is our conjecture, like Newton explaining a falling apple with gravity. A scientific conjecture, but conjectures aren't always correct or have limited scope. Newton's gravity works for macroscopic, slow-moving objects. When observations showed it failed for microscopic, high-speed objects, the theory was refuted. Einstein then proposed relativity, a new conjecture, to explain high-speed particles. Of course, this too isn't final truth. It's falsifiable. Perhaps someday, new observations will overturn it. Science advances through this cycle of conjecture and refutation. Popper used a metaphor to describe scientific progress. He compared theories to particles, suspended in liquid. Empirically tested ones settle like sediment. The newest sediment represents our current scientific understanding. Through empirical testing, new sediment constantly forms, covering the old, just like our scientific understanding keeps updating. For Popper, scientific progress depends on our constant reflection and testing. No existing scientific theory is absolute truth. Scientific exploration is an endless journey. That's why his autobiography is titled Unended Quest. If testing proves a theory wrong, abandon it for new ones. This critical spirit must permeate science. Of course, such criticism isn't blind, but must be rational and evidence-based. Thus, Popper's thought is called critical rationalism. So how did it influence scientists? British philosopher Brian McGee said, "Understanding Popper's scientific outlook liberates researchers' minds." What does that mean?
Traditional views saw science as sacred.
Scientists aim to discover absolutely correct truths. The result? Scientists would instinctively defend their theories for life, even as time proved them wrong, and better theories emerged. This mindset trapped scientists' thinking and blocked new theories through entrenched authority. But for Popper, any theory could be falsified. Scientists shouldn't feel shame. They should celebrate falsification like new theories' birth. Popper's outlook profoundly influenced scientists like Einstein and Bohr. In 1949, Popper lectured at Princeton University with Einstein and Bohr in attendance.
These two scientific giants were deeply captivated by Popper's ideas.
After the lecture, they discussed philosophy of science with Popper for 6 hours. Popper made top scientists realize only by breaking absolute truth chains could new theories emerge. That's how science maintains vitality and accelerates forward. It's important to note that falsified scientific theories still hold value. They become permanent parts of humanity's knowledge system. Popper proposed a three-worlds theory. World 1 is the physical universe. World 2 is human consciousness. World 3 is the autonomous realm of knowledge, independent of matter and mind. World 3 contains scientific ideas, artworks, books, journals, all preserved permanently in libraries. Popper believed humanity's knowledge system, World 3, exists independently of physical reality, World 1. While World 3 originates from Worlds 1 and 2, it profoundly influences both in return. If human tools vanished, World 1 damaged, World 3's books could rebuild them. Thus, World 3 can reconstruct World 1. If we disappeared, our knowledge and books would still guide descendants' thoughts and consciousness. Meaning, World 3 also shapes World 2. So that's Popper's monumental contribution to philosophy of science. He introduced falsification and falsifiability, showed science evolves through conjecture or refutation, and created the three worlds framework. Of course, Popper's worldview extended beyond science to human society. Growing up in wartime turmoil drove his deep reflection on social issues. Now let's explore his political philosophy. Quote, his political thought centers on the poverty of historicism and the open society and its enemies, summarized in two pillars: critiquing historicism and establishing the open society concept. First, his critique of historicism, as the title The Poverty of Historicism suggests, Popper's political philosophy begins with rejecting historicism. Historicism claims society's current form is determined by all past history. Similarly, humanity's current social state can determine what future society will look like.
It's like physics. Knowing an object's current motion and forces lets you predict its future state.
The most famous historicist is the renowned Plato. Plato believed societal development follows fixed laws, and studying them reveals humanity's future direction. Thus, he designed the Republic, a perfect state that would never decline. Plato's student Aristotle shared this view. Popper firmly opposed them, stating that seeing society as an object moving along fixed paths is pure collectivist fantasy. Popper argued Plato's mistake was imagining human society as a finite, closed system. A closed society refers to tribal or city-state-sized communities in primitive societies. Everyone lives by identical, unchanging customs. Extending this globally would achieve absolute equality. But our world is vast. It's impossible for everyone to be identical. Popper contended that overemphasizing equality contradicts human freedom, and absolute equality requires oppressive rules. Such rules stifle freedom and creativity, becoming breeding grounds for totalitarianism. Popper saw Plato's influence in the ideological roots of 20th-century fascism. In Plato's vision, guaranteeing equality required ruler monopoly on military education, elite ideological unity, and suppression of innovation in education, law, religion. German fascism used precisely such blueprints to expand rapidly, causing profound European suffering. For Popper, humanity cannot exist as a finite, closed society. Thus, he proposed the concept of an open society. An open society is defined in contrast to closed societies. Here, individuals aren't bound by rigid customs but have freedom to develop, think rationally, and continually adapt their lives. On this foundation, people worldwide build extensive, complex networks. This is an open society. For Popper, open society is humanity's natural state. Like science having no absolute truth, there's no ultimate perfect societal form like Plato's Republic. In open societies, everyone influences societal direction. Problems should be resolved peacefully through gradual reform, not violence. Popper spent his life advocating freedom, democracy, and peace, a renowned defender of democratic values. Thus, he attracted followers like former UK PM Margaret Thatcher. His theories impacted 20th-century politics and finance alike. Financial titan George Soros is Popper's foremost disciple. Popper showed societies have no absolute laws. Soros thus argued, economics has no predictable patterns. Past market data can't forecast future trends. Yet Soros recognized humanity's desire to find economic patterns for profit. His investments exploit this psychology, acting counterintuitively for exceptional returns. Soros also embraced Popper's falsification, openly admitting errors. Each mistake falsifies faulty strategies, reducing risk. This concludes our exploration of Unended Quest. Popper famously said, "True ignorance isn't lacking knowledge, but refusing new knowledge." Human progress requires rejecting dogma, admitting errors, and embracing new knowledge openly. This applies to each of us personally. Well, that's Unended Quest.
Study notes are below. Until next time.